All right, Team ET, welcome back for another live broadcast, another fortnight gone, and we're back with you again. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to look at that transition from 20th century to 21st century leader that I've touched on many times. But we're also going to look at the case for strengthening communication as part of that process, as part of that transitional journey. And so I'm going to be looking at a couple of cases, if you like, and helping us go through that process. So let's get underway, and we'll pause a couple of times and make sure we're all still okay. But essentially, we'll go through to the end, and then we'll wrap it up. All right. So starting with this announcement, who would have thought that right here, right now, we're going to be tackling one of the most perplexing questions of our time. And that is, we're going to try and provide an answer to what is the future of leadership. Can you imagine? A topic that the experts have argued since the turn of the century. What is the future of leadership? Well, let's begin by ruling out some things that we can safely say it is no longer. First up, the fact that the future of leadership is not a place for a 20th century leadership. It's also not a place for a solo executive, and it's no longer the case of managing through or only managing through a VUCA environment. So please allow me to elaborate a little on these 3 points, and firstly, just to qualify them by acknowledging that every country, of course, together with its culture, sits at a different stage on that evolutionary leadership spectrum. However, we are all part of that same global society, and at some stage, I believe that those 3 points I mentioned will be true for each and every one of us as leaders. So with that clarity, what do I mean by those 3 statements? I thought long and hard about the best way that I could illustrate it, and I decided that probably the most effective way is by sharing my own story. Now, I can't gauge how many of you listening today are as old as me and may have commenced your journey into leadership during perhaps the 70s or 80s in the last century. For me, despite this occurring so far back, I still have vivid recollections of that metamorphic process that I went through as if it was yesterday. And I'm confident, well, reasonably confident, that there will be at least some of you in the audience who experienced something similar to what I'm about to explain. So here's how it unfolded for me. One night as I went to bed happy and responsible for nobody other than myself, overnight as I slept, the transformation magically occurred. When I woke the next morning, there blazoned on my chest was that bright red letter S and the red cape firmly attached. I joined the legion of superhumans that went by the name of leader. And with that title came the understanding that I now held the power to solve any challenge thrown into my path, from team conflict to world hunger. And given a sufficient opportunity, I could have resolved all of them. I wore my badge with honor, a slightly inflated chest, and a huge ego. And as each challenge was placed in front of me, I and I alone would find the solution and marshal my team to carry out my requirements. And as the word spread that I'd arrived, more and more opportunities were laid at my feet to conquer, allowing me to continue ascending that corporate ladder. It was as if the company had run a campaign with all of my stakeholders who now saw me as their savior and the answer to their prayers. They sought me whenever a difficulty arose. Customers, my boss, my team, my colleagues, my suppliers, and many others I didn't realize even existed. So I dug in, calling on my grit and resilience, looking around at the other superhuman leaders and taking solace from the blinkered reality that they were coping and not complaining, so this must be the way it is. And so I toughened, doubling down, committing to the fight the battles and prevail. believing that accountability and ownership meant working longer, later nights, weekends, and through my holidays, doing whatever it took to win at this game. And each time when it seemed I would drop, a new opportunity presented that reignited the flame and the cycle continued. Gradually, however, after many years, perhaps decades, I looked around and I saw I was isolated. My family's still there but distant. My team no longer the loyal supporters they once were. My peers avoided me. My boss seemed always unavailable. And I found myself spending more and more time alone in my office. One day, exhausted and deflated, I sat back for the first time in as long as I could remember and reflected on how I had wound up here. Frazzled, pivoting once again on the verge of burnout, and suddenly anxious about my world and where I had landed. I'd become a solo executive, devoid of friends. It seemed that I had blinked and missed my children growing up, and the bedrock of my existence, the relationship with my wife, had lost its sparkle. But wait, this momentary awakening has materialized at just the right instant. There must be a reason now I'm seeing this. Perhaps it's not too late to make a change, to make it right. I know, I'll find a new job, somewhere that's less demanding and gives me the opportunity to spend more time with my family, with my friends, and doing the things that I enjoy and love. And so it was. I started a new role, slightly more junior, and vowing to myself and others that this time it would be different. And for a while, that was the case. Through these renewed eyes of hope, things started to regain their luster. Sadly, however, it didn't last. And before long, I found myself back in that same familiar pattern, committed to the cause, seemingly happy on the exterior, but at the expense of those around me. Outwardly, I was different. I seemed less patient, more demanding, and the bridge was burning, and I alone was bailing the water to keep the fires at bay while still trying to perform the task required. My neural network were firing and repeating the patterns they knew all too well, but it seemed the chemical doses being administered to the body were driving me to new lows. I was constantly looking over my shoulder at the younger talent, and I imagined them snapping at my heels and waiting for me to fail so as to consume me. The world I operated in had become more complex. The daily blend of volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous actions seemed to be on steroids and ushered in a new guard. It had become an increasingly baney existence, brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And there I stood, isolated once again, with no life raft or land on the horizon to head for safety. Phew. A little dramatic, perhaps. I wonder how many of you resonated with any part of my story. For many 20th century leaders, this was the way it was. We lacked guidance in the early part of our career, and our lessons came from the observations of those we looked to as our mentors, not realizing that in many instances, they too were caught in this spiraling whirlpool of pain. And unfortunately, this legacy has spilled over into the early parts of the 21st century, particularly with many my age that remain in the workforce. And I highlight this because I coach a number of executives stuck with this dilemma. The world has changed around them, yet they're still bailing water. And in some companies, to make matters worse, they're serving as mentors to those new younger leaders, enticing and enhancing the risk that these younger, eager, malleable souls will set off down a similar path. Maybe many of you have been fortunate in your career and escaped that trauma, but the world is hurting, as we can see through the results of repeated surveys. One of the most recent major findings comes from a survey conducted by the Development Dimensions International. You may know them as DDI, and the Joss Bersin Group. they have this report that they've released called the Global Leadership Forecast of 2021, where they surveyed 15,000 leaders across 50 countries. And a couple of the findings that came out of this was that nearly 60%, 60% of those 15,000 leaders reported that they feel totally used up by the end of each work. Now, we know this is a strong indicator for burnout, right? And approximately half, 44% of that 60%, said that they expected to change jobs and companies as a result. So let's pause here for a moment and just contemplate that, reflect on that. The world is in a lot of pain still. The pandemic, of course, didn't help, in some cases worsened, but it's in a lot of pain and something needs to change. So I'd like to just now change tack a little bit here, because until now we've spoken about the challenges of being a 20th century leader. And I'm guessing you may rightly be thinking that, I've just touched on one small portion of this, and there's plenty more out there we could be sharing and talking about. And I agree with you 100%. However, the 21st century leader must be different from their predecessors. And that's the terrain I really want to dive and venture into. And to do so, we'll embark on another story, but it's a journey this time, not with me, but with a gentleman by the name of Tom. Tom is the CEO of a highly successful manufacturing, and he's been pondering the very question that we set out to answer at the beginning. What is the future of leadership? And in his case, he's asking himself, is he the right person to lead his company into that future? Right? And I have to say that the mere fact that Tom is pondering this question shows that he's pretty astute and not the norm, ahead of the pack. This question has been on his mind for, let's say, the last 12 months, and he commissioned a large, well-known consultancy to help him discover the answer. So today, sitting back at his desk, Tom clicks on the file titled The Future Leader. It was the consultant's report, and he just wanted to remind himself one more time about their findings and suggestions. So as he looked through the report, the first observation the consultants made was that amidst the increasing complexity, the environment we're in today, the constant chaos, leaders somehow must learn to step back and observe the dynamic of the parts. What do I mean by that? So stepping back, first gazing from the outside, looking in, rather than the typical inside looking out. Stepping back from our business ecosystem allows us to really see the systemic environment and the interplay between the parts and the whole far more clearly. We can start to understand that when one part shifts, it creates this ripple effect on all of the other parts. And this shift is often seamless and we can easily overlook it. You can probably find videos online of schools of fish, as an example. And as a predator swims in to that school of fish to attack and find its lunch, the school breaks apart. And as the predator moves through, the school reforms just as effortlessly. Another example is the flock of starlings that you see online as well quite often, dancing in the air, right? The movement or the shift of one triggering this harmonious reaction across the flock. By the leader being able to take this systemic perspective helps us to see ourselves, our team, and the organization, the various stakeholders and even their stakeholders, as well as the wider ecosystem of industries and community. And to some extent, the interplay that's possible and occurring between all of those groups. It becomes a truly powerful game that is all encompassing. And once we have that clarity, the really interesting dynamic that occurs is that the chaos that we were experiencing somehow seems more manageable. So let's summarize that. The first thing we need to become as leaders of the future is to become that big picture, holistic, perspective leader committed to stepping back regularly to assess their broader ecosystem before re-engaging, playing with the strategies, etc. One way of thinking about it is if you imagine looking through a camera and adjusting the lens so that first you have this wide angle, you've zoomed out, you can accommodate that angle taking in the broader landscape. Once you're clear and focused and understanding of that broader image, then zooming back in to focus on the subject at hand and developing the actions and the strategies to work on that subject, but with that broader perspective. All right. So then the report continues, building off this first learning and introducing the second shift, which is the need to become a Horizon 3 disruptor. Now, there's a great model that we can use to aid us. In particular, it puts the whole context about this theory in place. It's called Bill Clark. Bill Clark discovered it or developed this model. It's called the 3 Horizons. And in Horizon 1, it's when the leader and the business is maintaining that status quo. They're on the inside, looking out, reacting to that veiny world, that brittle, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible world. Whereas Horizon 2 is when the business starts to innovate and comes with new ideas that build further on the developed products and services they already have. This is what keeps the company alive and moving forward. Then we have Horizon 3, and this is where the outside-in, future-back perspectives really start to take. It's where the leader steps back to take that broader and further out view of the horizon, where the future disruptions lie that probably aren't visible or even invented at that stage. In today's world, we could say that OpenAI's development of ChatGPT is a Horizon 2 result verging on Horizon 3 by leveraging multiple existing products and bringing elements of them together into this powerful program in a way that's available to the masses. And as we know, this is going to continue to evolve, just as we saw with successive versions of the smartphone. Right? With each new version brings new possibilities that perhaps couldn't be realized with the earlier version. So Horizon 3 disruptors would be leaders that look at the potential being created through the broader whole ecosystem. If you think about the technological convergence, quantum computing, material science, biotech, IoT, Web 3.0, 6G, leveraging collaboration, scalability, capitalizing on all of these things converging at this moment in time and then running with it. Thinking about what's going to be that future. What are the likely disruptions to appear on that horizon that we can identify now and start to plan and play with? These are the things that are not there yet. So things that may even appear more science fiction than plausible at this moment. Some of the examples might be Elon Musk and his Neuralink company, where they have they're developing the technology for putting a device to your brain that allows you to be able to communicate with the computer. And of course, there's all sorts of ramifications as that evolves to the point where we may even start to think about getting, call it, updates, brain updates, right? As technology warrants, or we need to learn new skills. Maybe we can get a little update on our brain program. These sorts of things are out there, I know, but these are the things that definitely are not off the table. You have his Mars mission, maybe another example, a little bit easier to visualize because we've been talking about space for a lot longer and dreaming about traveling intergalactic and to different planets and different locations. So the Mars mission, but still putting it into practice is something that's quite out there. We've got people like Ray Kurzweil and his projections to where AI is going, and singularity as an example, and all of the other elements that come with this and those projections. They really open Pandora's box for what may or may not occur not too far in the distant future. Right, so I think his projection is around the year 2045. So just over 20 years from now, he's projecting will be at singularity. We have people like Peter Diamandis, and he also does a lot of things. He's into space, he's into technology, but he also talks a lot about longevity, and he's heavily invested in studies the ability for humans to live longer. Already, there's projections that we could live to 120 plus if we chose to and applied some of the current technology. So as a result of that, he's involved in looking at the healthcare system and how will the healthcare system be able to accommodate life beyond its current 80, 90, 100 year boundaries. So these are forward-gazing individuals. They're looking outside in at the systemic ecosystem and the different vantage points to become unique Horizon 3 disruptors. Someone that can look to and see different futures, right, through converging ecosystems, and then they work on strategies that lead their company towards that vision. So back to Tom, and as he reread these first 2 points, you can imagine at his age, he's coming towards retirement age, he's feeling a little bit uncomfortable. He was pretty conservative throughout his career, and that's what served him well, made him successful. But this new direction seemed to require much more risk and a more risk-adverse leader. And you can imagine that for many leaders, this type of future is not really for the faint of heart. And one of the things that we envisage is that companies will need to put the right structures in place, supporting structures in place, so that when some of these futuristic thinkers, leaders head off with their company on a venture and it fails, that the whole business doesn't implode with that failure. So they're going to have to restructure their business, their organization, to be able to be agile, and you'll hear me talk about this in a minute. They're going to have to restructure. And the consultants highlighted one group in particular that's already heading down this path, which is the IT industry. They seem to have embraced the approach, and some more so than others, of course, right? And they've put in place practices that enable them to fail quickly and fail forward. Right? So as they come up with these Horizon 3 disruptor ideas, they have a means now of testing and putting it into practice very quickly to see whether it's actually going to stick. And with that, they're then able to either pull back from it, can it, or continue on the journey with it. They can make that decision. So they have a series of quality gates and milestones and targets that they're looking for, that they put in place and they assess aggressively on them. All right, so they're the first two, right? We're talking about systemic, looking at the world, big picture of the ecosystem you're in, looking at it from a systemic perspective, as well as becoming this horizon 3 disruptor. The third and fourth requirements that depict the future leader's success are agility and adaptability. And both are important for obvious reasons, and maybe some not so obvious, but the obvious thing is that we're in a constant state of change. And being agile enough with these strategies, these Horizon 3 strategies, is really going to mean the ability to adapt when the organization hasn't thought about something that another company in our industry is thinking about. So if we didn't predict everything on that horizon, we need to adapt. If we did predict it, then we need to be agile enough to be able to massage the business to accommodate that future, those new strategies. We all know it's unlikely that any one organization in the future is going to have total control. But those that are able to design their structure with enough flexibility and have the ability to duck and weave and to respond to the unexpected and modify their game, the quicker they can do it, the earlier they can do it and have the edge on the others, the better they will survive. And this scenario, therefore, means that we're suggesting a leader who's agile and adaptable as a disruptor with the ability to step back and see that big systemic picture. Right? That visionary who looks to the future and steers business towards the impending changes. That's a pretty impressive leader, which Tom acknowledged and mused to himself. The report, the consultant report, even gave this style of leadership a name. It referred to these leaders as catalysts. This is a leader that embodies all four of those characteristics, and then went further to define the leader as somebody who inspires and drives change, who fosters innovation, who empowers their team to achieve their full potential. They're passionate, visionaries, and focused on achieving results, but importantly, they also prioritize development and well-being of their team. They create a positive and empowering culture that encourages collaboration. They're risk takers and they're continuously learning. And they're skilled at communicating their vision and inspiring others to join in their pursuit. They're adaptable and flexible, able to navigate complexity and rapidly change with the shifting environment. So in summary, I guess you would say, ultimately they're driven by the desire to create positive change and make meaningful impact in their organization. So Tom sat there looking a bit perplexed, challenging himself, questioning whether he still possessed the energy to be this leader. And he realized the answer was slowly. On the next page, and written in bold print were the words, "Ignore this at your own peril." Tom remembered feeling uneasy the first time he looked at this statement, but having embraced it himself, he read on and it made so much more sense. The consultant's warning referred to the final piece of the puzzle. And this was the need for the future leader to demonstrate and command par excellence in the field of communication. And under this communication banner, of course, are a number of specific areas and elements that we talk about. The first, and maybe the most obvious, is the need to convey vulnerability. Remember my earlier story and the big, bright red letter S in the cape. We need to be able to let go of the belief and learn that to become capable of soliciting input and advice, we need to give up control, right? And not only control, but it may be at different stages of an operation. You'll hear me talk a little bit more about that. But the leader of the future must be able to put up their hand and honestly admit that, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer. I may not even understand the problem, but I am able to bring the team together to find the solution. Additionally, this is going to extend to the leader being prepared to transfer their power, as I just mentioned, when they realize they're not the most qualified to lead. Whether that's during a project, a change initiative, whether it's leading the department in a specific function, or perhaps the entire company at some stage. So let's just pause here again for a moment, because that's a fairly dynamic shift for most leaders. Now, there's always outliers, of course, right? And I don't want to say that this is not a generalization, because what I'm talking about is I'm blanketing everyone as who's a 20th century leader to having these problems. That's not the case. This is a generalization. So what's the rationale, you would rightly ask, and as I ask it, is there rationale for what I've just said? I believe so. I believe there is. To start with, we're faced with this rate of rapid, unrelenting change that's now occurring, driven through technological advances, driven through this convergence. It's impossible for one individual to hold all of the knowledge and all of the answers as maybe once they had a chance of it. And therefore, the solution is that it needs to be a collective and collaborative process, perhaps one that involves technology, utilizing and capitalizing on that technology that's out there, but also one that involves the team as well as the broader collaboration partners. Maybe you have to look to your stakeholders and broaden that horizon. What's possible if we engage with some of our stakeholders? And of course, today, this is pretty much a given already, right? So much so that it's one of the telltale indicators that I use to identify 20th century. Additionally, I see in the not too distant future a company structure that looks very different from what we have today. It's brought on by multiple factors, and I have dare to say it again, but we're talking once again about this convergence concept. Where we are right now, with everything happening, is another form of convergence. The workforce is shifting. We have the Great Resignation. We have all the things that happened during the pandemic. The pandemic was really the catalyst for accelerating these changes that had already started. But the workforce is shifting. And there's projections by 2027 that, that's only 4 years from now, that about half of all jobs will be filled by freelance personnel. Just let that sink in. Only 4 years from now, the projection by some leading research is that nearly half, or actually more than half of this, will be filled by freelance professionals. Now, on top of that, the next convergence is that the younger generations, many of you here tonight, right, are wanting to advance faster in your career. Good that you do. But company structures are not built that way, that enable them to accommodate that demand. Right? So as more Gen Z and beyond enter the workforce, the more you'll be demanding greater agility in the company structure to enable the possibility for you to develop yourself earlier, to grow earlier and advance your careers earlier. Now, compounding, next convergence, compounding this challenge is the shifting requirement to accommodate the raising of the retirement age across the world. I understand in India the age is not long. The retirement age has been increased long ago, and it varies depending on sectors where you work. But as I understand it, the average government retirement age is around 62, and in the private sector it's somewhere in between 60 and 65. There's a lot of latitude. So in some parts of the world, it already sits at 67, and there's talk about increasing it as high as 70 in the near future. And this is, for me, inevitable. Why? Because we need to address the need for more income and savings to offset that factor of longevity that's coming. Right? You start to see how these factors converge and tie together. Maybe that's a little bit too Horizon 3 thinking, but there's countries, there's governments, there's World Economic Forums that are talking about this already. You know, a decade ago, there was a meeting in the Vatican between the world's religious leaders, and they invited Peter Diamandis to speak about longevity so that they could commence the debate around the moral and the ethical issues that are likely to ensue, right? So this is something the world is really focused on. It's taking time to gather speed, but it's gradually building momentum. And so, in essence, this future leader needs to hone their vulnerability and transparency skills, letting go of their ego to the extent where it's conceivable that we could have multiple leaders running different portions of the same project to accommodate the demands of the younger generation, to offset the impact of having people like me working longer in my careers. All right. So back to the consultant's report and Tom's head scratching about the future. He'd always considered communications as one of his strengths, yet some of the points raised caused him to question the validity of that belief. And there were, of course, traditional areas which were listed as critical, and the report stated that as a catalyst leader, you've got to have that strong communication skill to be able to really effectively drive change and innovation. I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the areas that were listed, being able to listen to the concerns, to the opinions, to the feedback of their team, to understand the perspectives and identify opportunities of improvement, being able to articulate that vision and the ideas. Remember, the Horizon 3, you're going to have to be able to articulate the expectations to their team members in a way that they can understand it. Hard to talk about something not tangible and give it sufficient clarity that they can really understand. You're going to have to be able to do that. You're going to need to be able to understand and empathize when the team members' emotions and experiences are gone because of these things, and be able to then rebuild that trust and that rapport. You're going to have to stay transparent in your communication to allow that trust and for the accountability to be seen and appreciated. You're going to need to adapt your communication style to the different situations and the audiences who effectively. So perhaps no great surprise there in that statement by the consultant, but nice to be reminded. The report also reminded Tom to consider the broader shift that's occurring in the business operations, as well as in the foreseeable future. Things like the hybrid, remote, and freelance environments that we've spoken about presents the real likelihood, and already exists, to be honest, with some teams. I've led some teams, delivered leadership programs to some teams where this already exists. But where teams are based in different parts of the world, in different countries, in different regions, in different towns, in different cities. And once this occurs, it throws up a number of challenges that many leaders just haven't experienced before. It's going to place significant challenges on the communication prowess of the leader. very specifically in two areas. The first is in dealing with a team that comprises of cross-cultural team members. The leader's going to need to have the ability to communicate effectively with people from different cultures, from different countries and backgrounds. Perhaps where the leader's spoken language, English in our case now, is not the native language of many in the team. Think about the complications that creates. I'm sure even you listening to me tonight, you can understand the challenge if I start to speak too quickly, if my accent gets in the way, if the words I use are not familiar to you, and you start to try and put your meaning to my intention. These are all challenges that are becoming more and more common, but they're not going to go away. They're going to heighten. There's going to be certain actions and gestures that we may take as leaders for granted in one country, in one culture, that could be offensive to others. So this requires that the leaders will need to be very cognizant of the potential miscommunication, misunderstandings that they are likely to create. And therefore, their communication is going to need to be seeking input, seeking feedback, asking questions, checking. Is everybody understanding? Is everyone on board? Is there anything that needs to change in the way that I'm communicating? The second, and probably equally obvious, is with the virtual and remote work, leaders are going to and are already, but they need to become more effective in the use of technology through video conferencing, emailing, right? Emailing. I'm not sure how many of the younger generation still use email, but the messaging apps, the use of different platforms, the constant change and new technology that comes into the market, that the younger generation, the natives, the people born with technology versus the older generation who are struggling to keep pace. The challenges this is going to create for those older leaders is going to be real. It is real, and it's going to continue to become a nightmare. Now, they're going to have to think about the message they're conveying in the tone and the context and how they're going to manage the different time zones, how they're going to build a relationship without being able to meet in person and have that face-to-face interaction where you can touch the other person. Now, there may be some technology coming, granted, where this is overcome through a more immersive technology, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. But for the moment, these are the challenges that we're facing today, and it's likely to get even more challenging. And as the report that Tom was reading highlighted, these challenges already exist, as we've said, for many global organizations. So they're not insurmountable. But the thing is that they require for the leader to transition from where they were yesterday to where they need to be today and in the future. And this adds a burden to that leader in the short term. Now, it's not as though the leader is already just sitting around doing nothing. They're already stretched and overwhelmed and anxious and facing burnout through the sheer volume that they have to cope with. These added pressures just add to the complexity, all right? Hence the term veiny. They're brittle, not just volatile environment, it's brittle now. The leaders are so anxious because they're worried about the next change they're going to have to accommodate and somehow keep up with and lead through. The process is systemic now. You have to be able to see the interplay between the parts and the whole and not just look at things from a linear end-to-end perspective only. You have to see the whole picture, right? And sometimes it just feels unfathomable, incomprehensible. So as Tom sat there contemplating, he reached for his coffee as he read the next portion of the room. And it started, there's several emerging communications that are likely to gain more prominence during the next. Things such as communication through the use of virtual and augmented mixed realities. And these technologies, as they advance, they're likely to change communication and take it to a place of the virtual environment. Let's stimulate or simulate physical spaces and allow for more immersive experience. Now, of course, the classic example of this, now there's VR is not new, AR has been around for some time, although it's not progressing as expected, but we know the shift by Zuckerberg and Facebook to the company name of Meta and the projection that Zuckerberg has for the future and the use of VR, AR with a totally immersive business environment. So that would be an example. And if you think about how the leaders of today will be able to cope with it. Now, again, I'm talking the general masses. There will be leaders, of course, that cope with it perfectly fine. There'll be other leaders that are able to learn it perfectly fine. But this is on top of what we're already coping with. Another is, as we mentioned, with Neuralink, the use of brain-computer interfaces. So there'll come a time where it's not telepathy, but through the technology that we're wearing, from the signals transmitted from our brain to the computers, we'll be able to communicate differently. Right? So as advances in neuroscience, and there's been huge advances in the last 2 decades, as neuroscience and our understanding of the brain advances, as technology continues to advance, it's going to make all these things possible. And then the final thing, which is really an extension to the first two, I feel, is that things become more wearable. They become more mainstream wearable. Augmented reality glasses that are highly sophisticated, that can read the retina of your eye and assess your health. Watches that you wear that can act like beacons, communicating with you effortlessly. The navigation systems we have today on steroids, if you right? Clothing that regulate and monitor our body temperature, regulate the amount of perspiration, regulate the muscle contraction and effort that we're applying, and feeding all this information back into maybe our watch or our glasses and into a computer database that's connected to some online medical platform that is monitoring our annual health checkup. We can make it up as much as we want to. But we're heading in these directions. Now, what do all these things mean for the leader? The world is fast approaching where we will have these cloud-based databases, maybe not cloud, maybe edge, who knows? But we will have these databases where all of these things report into and feed back, and our leaders will get the signals on their watch to say, hey, Tom down the road, his heart rate has just increased dramatically. Mary seems like her oxygen level is depleting, whatever, right? What does that mean for me as a leader? I'm not a medical practitioner. What do I do with this information? These are the things that we're going to have to work through as time goes on, as this equipment becomes more mainstream, as things become possible through that Horizon 3 perspective and start to become reality. As Tom reached the end of the report, he stood up and reached for his mobile, smiling to himself as he opened his Slack app. With his mind made up, he typed his grammatically correct brief message to the chat group labeled board members. And after reviewing it carefully, he hit the send button. And with that, I will finish my talk for today. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, I've cast your mind towards some alternate perspectives, some additional thoughts that you can take and run with and look to the future. If you identify those 20th century leaders in your organization, in your team, be aware. Be aware that the future leader needs to be different. Future leader needs to be one that can step back and see the whole picture. They need to be one that can look to that Horizon 3, contemplate the convergence of so many elements occurring in our world at this moment, and consider what innovations may be possible based on that projection. And how can you and your business utilize and capitalize and strategize and move in that direction towards that future? You're going to need to be agile and adaptable to try and do that. You're going to need to become vulnerable and let go of the S and the red cape. Admit that you don't have all the answers, but you know where to find those solutions through your team, through the use of technology, perhaps through collaboration partners. You're going to have to become par excellence in the field of communication. And that's a broad scope to talk about. In dealing with global teams, in dealing with cultures that you're not familiar with, where time zones create challenges, where language becomes a barrier, where gestures could create a problem. These are things that you need to be fluent and aware in. And then we have the challenges that are on the horizon that are heading our way. The future technologies that threaten to disrupt the way that we're communicating and performing and applying our skills. We need to be visible and working in the direction of those changes and disruptions if we want to stay ahead of it. And that, my friends, is what I believe the future looks like for our leaders. We call them a catalyst leader. So with that, I'll finish my talk and say thank you for being such wonderful, patient listeners as I rambled on. I hope there's some questions, and I look forward to communicating with you as we go through the next one. Thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.